In 1 Timothy 2, 11 through 15, Paul writes to Timothy that women should learn quietly and submissively. He says, "I do not let women teach men or have authority over them." Seems pretty clear, right? Maybe there's more to it than that. Let's talk about it on 3-Minute Theology. So if taken exactly how it's written in English, women should have no authority over men and should never be allowed to teach them under any circumstances in church. But the guy who wrote this didn't even follow his own advice. So maybe we're missing what he meant. Firstly, what's the context? In first century Jewish culture, women were, unfortunately, often uneducated. When Paul said women should learn quietly and submissively, he was offering them an amazing opportunity to learn. In addition, we need to reconcile that Paul himself acknowledges that women publicly prayed and prophesied in 1 Corinthians 11. Now, some interpret 1 Timothy 2 to mean that women should never teach in the assembled church because then they would be teaching men. However, Paul actually commended a woman named Priscilla who taught Apollos, a man, in Acts 18. On top of that, Paul frequently mentioned women in authority in the church. Check out Romans 16 and Philippians 4. Now, maybe Paul was only prohibiting the women at Ephesus, where Timothy was. Ephesus was the center of the cult of Artemis and apparently had a problem with false teachings, especially the women, based on 2 Timothy 3, 1 through 9. So maybe Paul was simply telling Timothy not to put anyone, in the case of the Ephesian church, women, into a place of leadership when they weren't ready. But like I always like to do, let's look at the original Greek this was written in. There's a distinct shift in Paul's writing. He switches from the plural men and women in 1 Timothy 2, 8 through 10 to the singular man and woman in verses 11 through 12. Now this may mean nothing or it was intentional. This singular man and woman may mean that Paul was referring to a specific man and woman. Verse 15 makes more sense if verses 11 through 12 are speaking about a specific man and woman, maybe a couple in the church there. Verse 15 contains a singular verb that means she will be saved in addition to a plural verb that means they continue. In other words, if we consider the literal Greek text, the verse could read she, the woman in verses 11 through 12, will be saved if they, the man and woman in verse 12, continue in faith, love, holiness, and modesty. Unfortunately, the verbs aren't always translated this way in English. In addition, some of the structure of the Greek has led some translators to assume that the man and woman are generic examples of anonymous people. However, we can look at 1st and 2nd century Greek letters written to people and see that statements seemingly referring to anonymous people actually refer to real people. So it's at least worth considering how it would change our understanding if it was translated as, "I don't permit the woman to teach the man." In other words, maybe Paul was saying to Timothy, "Look, Timothy, in this situation, I don't want that woman teaching that man." Maybe Paul was referring to a specific couple and was protecting their identities. This wouldn't be the first time he did this. Check out 1 Corinthians 5 and 2 Corinthians 2. So given these interpretive challenges, I don't think it's fair to use these verses alone to silence women in the church or keep them from leadership. Our theology should never be based on only one verse anyway. And when we consider how Paul commends women who are doing the very thing he seems to restrict, it leads me to believe we're just missing something in translation. And considering what Paul modeled, maybe he was addressing a specific couple in a specific church that was engaged in an activity that happened to involve teaching. Well, that's all for this 3-Minute Theology. Until next time.